All right, everybody, welcome back to the Endurance Sports University Triathlon Study Hall, episode number 7. A little bit about me, the presenter. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Ryan Reel. I'm the head coach and founder here at Endurance Sports University, USAT Level 2 coach, youth and junior coach, master's degree in exercise physiology, biomechanics, have a second in organic and biological chemistry. I was the USAT high performance team head coach and team director from 2011 to 2015. Was with Training Bible Coaching, was one of their few elite coaches. 2013 to 15 before I broke off on my own to do Endurance Sports University. So those a little bit about me. So what is Endurance Sports University? Really quickly, international leader in triathlon education and coaching resources and services, not only for athletes that want personal coaching, but for self-coached athletes, athletes on a budget, and then also continuing education and business mentoring for other coaches. So that's kind of what we accomplish here. New thing that I keep talking about, throw it out there one more time, membership program we just started, specifically engineered for self-coached athletes and athletes on a budget. It's going to include an initial one-on-one consultation, so that's 30 to 45 minutes, really digging into you as an athlete, make sure you're all set and ready to roll, and then a long list of other things. So training plan of your choice, 4 weeks at a time. These triathlon study hall calls are included, private Facebook group, and all the other good stuff listed below. So those of you that might be interested that are seeing this, it is a monthly commitment or a 4-week commitment, 30-day notice to cancel. It's $49.99 for 4 weeks. If you want to try a 2-week free trial period, just enter in that discount code MPRO-2-weeks, and that will get you 2 free weeks. All right, so the agenda tonight, first thing we're going to start off with, short presentation, the keys to a good taper. And then from there, open up to question and answer. So let's go ahead and get rolling. All right, so a taper, it's an exercise training technique. It's been designed to reverse the training-induced fatigue without the loss of those training adaptations. All right, so the goal is reduce fatigue, but keep the adaptations. Big main goal is reduce the physiological and the psychological stress of the daily training and the associated fatigue in order to make sure somebody's ready for race day. So it makes a lot of sense. When you think about it, nobody really likes the taper. They feel like they should always be doing more. They could always be doing more. Why are they not doing enough, etc. It's a pretty hard period for a lot of athletes, but it's something that if you're really wanting performance, you either taper or you're creating far larger problems. All right, so looking at the taper, there's 3 key variables that we have to understand and take into account when we're talking about a taper. All right, first one is the volume, right? So how much training, how many hours, how many miles, how many yards or meters, whatever it is, you're accumulating during the taper, all right? The second thing, how frequently are we doing it, right? And then the third, obviously, is going to be intensity. So 3 variables to training, also the 3 variables that we have to take into account with the taper, all right? So all 3 of these mixed together are going to create the training load or the training stimulus, which is what is ultimately generating the fatigue. That's what we need to reduce while maintaining your levels of fitness. All right, so talking about the timing, if a taper is too long or does not maintain enough training stimulus, it can bring about partial or complete loss of those training-induced physiological adaptations. All right, so that is commonly referred to as detraining. Right, so we don't want the taper to be too long. We don't want it to be too little, because if it is, we're ultimately giving back too much of what we worked so hard to get to in the training leading up to the race. All right, so there's 2 major taper methods. There's a high intensity and a low intensity taper. We're going to kind of hit on both these real quick and then go through and kind of show you what the best approach is and show you a little bit of scientific evidence along with it. So a high intensity taper simply means that you're keeping the intensity up while reducing the overall volume. When we look at a low intensity taper, we're cutting out all the intensity and then reducing the volume as we go. All right, so between the 2 of these, the high intensity taper is absolutely, without a doubt, the way that you got to go. If you're not maintaining the intensity, that can be anything from high intensity to race specific intensity. If you're not maintaining that, you're giving up too much. You're simply giving back too many physiological adaptations. So let's go through some of the more intricate parts of the taper and see if we can explain this a little bit more. All right, so when we're talking about physiology, there's 5 key things or variables, if you will, that we need to be aware of, we need to control, we need to monitor, etc., while we are going through a taper. Now, if we're looking at this, hormones, enzymes, energy levels, muscular power, and then blood. So whether it's blood volume or red blood cell concentrations, there's a few of these that you can actually go monitor if you really wanted to during a taper. It's going to require blood draw. It's going to require some muscle biopsies. Really not super pleasant things, especially right before a race. Or we can just look at the science and look at the guinea pigs, the other human athletes that have gone through these trials, and see, okay, what is science telling us about this? What do I know that's happening? And I think if we can explain some of what is happening physiologically, you guys will be able to make more sense out of taper. So let's go ahead and get going through some of these guys. So the first one I want to talk about is hormones. All right. So the two big ones we care about, testosterone and cortisol. Yes, gals, you do have some testosterone in your system. All right. And that ultimately is a good thing. All right. So looking at these two hormones, when an athlete is subjected to a high training load or levels of training or emotional stress, cortisol is ultimately released into the system. And if have ever looked at diet sections in Walgreens or CVS or whatever, they have cortisol blockers. All right. And basically, whether it's a high level of stress, whether that comes from training or from an emotional standpoint, cortisol is released. And cortisol is a catabolic hormone, meaning it's going to eat muscle. It's going to destroy or break things down. So when cortisol is released into the system, especially during a high load, high stress training block, ultimately it's going to initiate the breakdown of protein inside the body, which is going to be your muscle, right? So does that sound like anything that anybody wants? No, of course not, right? So thankfully, inside the human body, hormones are normally paired with another hormone that has the ability to counter the effect of the first one, all right? So with cortisol, the counter hormone to this is testosterone, right? So what we're looking at is testosterone is anabolic, meaning building, right? So what it's doing is stimulating protein formation. Again, that's the anabolic process. So the interplay between testosterone and cortisol is something that is very well known. It's been studied extensively by exercise scientists, and we know what the general ratios that we want are. So this is something absolutely that you could go have blood drawn and they could check the levels of testosterone and compare it to the levels of cortisol. But ultimately, unless you're having a real issue with something, unless you are really, walking the line, really trying performance being the main goal, the blood test just isn't necessarily worth it. All right. So it's been shown that with endurance athletes, they're going to have a decreased amount of testosterone in the middle of big, heavy training blocks. All right. And that is, going to be leading to a little bit slower recovery, kind of stuff like that. The relationship between the two, again, has been extensively investigated. We definitely know the ratios. So the big thing that we need to keep in mind is that as we increase the ratio of testosterone to cortisol, right, during a taper, meaning testosterone is going up, cortisol is going down. As we do that, that's been shown to increase performance, right? And along with that, it's going to increase recovery and it's going to reduce fatigue. So this is one of the key variables. If you've tracked a lot about hormones or read about them, that kind of explaining how the relationship between cortisol and testosterone is really taken care of. All right, so the next one, enzymes. So the big ones we're going to take a look at tonight are just oxidative enzymes. Basically, they're responsible for the production of energy inside of a cell, whether it's a muscle cell or another cell. It has to be present in a sufficient concentration in order to ensure the proper amount of energy is produced. Right, so definitely something that we want to keep an eye on with a taper. Right? And again, and I say keep an eye on, I'm not necessarily meaning we need to go get blood drawn, but it's something that we are looking at, and from the physiology side of the house, we understand what's going on here. Right? So the oxidative enzymes are going to decrease as big training loads or training blocks are put onto an athlete, but once they enter into the taper, it's going to allow for those oxidative enzymes to catch up. That's the performance is increasing. Right? So if we take a look at one of these oxidative enzymes, citrate synthase, or obviously abbreviated CS, it's an indicator of increased mitochondrial content, which is responsible for generating ATP or adenosine triphosphate. That's the primary fuel source for the body at a cellular level. All right. So if we take a look at the graph on the right, there's some interesting stuff to take a look at. So we're going to see a bunch of graphs that are going to look like this. Let me orient you on this. X-axis is just simply the type of taper, right? The y-axis is going to be the variable that we're measuring. And then what we're going to look at, the orange is always going to be pre-taper levels. The blue is what happens at the end of the taper, right? And anything that has a star by it is indicating a significant change, right? So when we look at the CS concentration right here, we see that if we were going to do, let's say, a 3-week taper for an Ironman, they measure the numbers right at the beginning of the 3 weeks. They measure the numbers at the morning of race day, and that's what they're looking at, right? So if an athlete 3 weeks out says, I'm going to do absolutely nothing, I'm done training, let's roll with this, right? What's happening here, ultimately, they have a decreased level of citrate synthase, right? An even lower level of that oxidative enzyme. With the low intensity taper, they have a slight decrease, but still a decrease. With the high intensity taper, meaning they're keeping the high intensity or the intensity with it, we see an increase in the oxidative enzyme. So that's definitely a positive thing. And the main point of this is kind of illustrating, why are we doing high intensity training? Why are we maintaining intensity? Why am I going so hard in a taper? This is why. It's showing you what's happening from the physiological standpoint and how this is benefiting us from the taper. All right, so the next one is going to be energy. Again, energy produced by carbohydrates primarily in the body. Fat is obviously an energy source. Broken down and stored fat, carbohydrates broken down and stored as glycogen or glucose within the muscle, the liver, or within the blood. All right, so while training, glycogen is abundant and it's readily used as a substrate to provide the energy. All right, so what we're looking at here is when an athlete is going to enter into the taper, their muscle glycogen levels have been shown to increase significantly, providing even more available glucose or fuel on race day, right? So if we take a look at the graph, oops, there we go. If we take a look at the graph, now on the y-axis, we have glycogen concentrations, right? So with rest only, we saw a very large increase in muscle glycogen. That's a good thing, right? With the low intensity taper, we actually saw a little bit of a decrease, right? And then when we come take a look at the high intensity taper, we saw the largest of all the increases when we're talking about glycogen levels, right? So this is absolutely big. If your body has the ability to store more glycogen, that's less carbohydrate you have to add into your system, lower opportunities for gastrointestinal distress or any of that fun stuff there. All right, so muscle power is going to be the next one. So it's a safe assumption that if any athlete completes, the aforementioned tapers, so high intensity, low intensity, they're going to see an increase in performance, ideally, right? They're going to be fresher. The real question is reduction in fatigue and what does that do to the levels of fitness, right? But we're going to estimate from all the scientific literature that you're going to see roughly a 3% improvement on your performance. So everybody take a quick second. Think about, what does 3% mean to you? All right, if we take a look, it might not seem like a significant amount, but as we look at longer races, it definitely is, right? So for short course athletes, sprint Olympic distance, 3% is enough to be on the podium or not, right? But if we're going to talk about, let's say, Ironman, we're going to be able to see some very, very obvious, benefits of this 3% increase. For example, if you're going to ride an Ironman in 6 hours, if you cut 3% off of that, that's 11 minutes, right? Would you rather have 5:49 next to your name versus 6? Of course you would, right? So when we take a look at a 12-hour Ironman finish, that's going to cut it down to 11:39. Right, so 3% increase, pretty stellar, pretty awesome. Definitely something we want to take a look at. All right, so looking further along with that, the tapers that have been shown to be the most beneficial, as you've kind of seen through the evidence with the high intensity and the low intensity tapers, shorter and faster tapers while maintaining the high intensity. Right, that's going to be the best bet for the athletes that are looking at endurance events. All right, so the longer and harder the athlete trains, the longer the taper needs to be. So for example, Ironman athletes, normally it's going to be about a 3-week taper. For an Olympic distance athlete, could be anywhere from 10 to 14 days. So that's just kind of giving you an idea of what we're looking at with the taper. All right. Okay, so last one we're going to take a look at is going to be the blood. So we got 2 graphs thrown up there at one time. So with a good taper, we're going to expect to see an increase in the blood volume and the red blood cell content. So go ahead and take a look at the graphs for a second, get oriented on those. So, all right, on the left first, looking at blood volume, the biggest winner right here is going to be the high intensity taper. So definitely the biggest gain there. And then taking a look at the one on the right, we definitely see the high intensity taper being the winner again. All right, so why is blood volume important to us? Why are red blood cell content important to us? Blood volume has a lot to do with how much blood is available. Red blood cell content obviously is going to be carrying the nutrients. So both quite important when we take a look at a taper. Okay, so last one that we really want to take a look at is going to be time to fatigue. All right, so go ahead and take a quick peek at that one. All right, so across the y-axis, we have the time to fatigue. So what this basically is the exercise scientists put the athletes on a trainer and said, okay, you're going to run at a given output for a ride at a given output for a given period of time, and let's see how long it goes before you say, all right, I'm tired. Right? And this could be, any various different testing protocols for the bike and for the run. In general, with the rest-only taper, we saw about a 3% decrease in the time to fatigue, where the low-intensity taper had about a 6% increase, where that high-intensity taper had the largest increase in time to fatigue, right? And basically, if it takes you longer to get tired, the better off that's going to be. So, all right, some conclusions on the taper real quick for you guys and gals. A well-thought-out taper should include a mixture of high intensity and low intensity, right? So you got to maintain the intensity, but you also have to have some low intensity stuff in there with it. It's going to increase or maintain the frequency and the intensity while reducing the overall volume of training throughout the entire taper by anywhere from 60 to 85%. Remember, the goal is to reduce the fatigue that is associated with the training leading into the taper. Once we get to that 10-day out period, we're pretty much done making physiological adaptations. So that's something that we want to keep in mind. So that's going to sum up the presentation for this evening. Next Triathlon Study Hall is going to be next Tuesday, August 25th. Same time, same station. Give me 24 hours or so to get that link updated right there. And let's open this up for some questions. Any questions you guys have about the taper or any other things, just go ahead and let me know. Type them in. All right, so Matt has a good question. How to prepare for transition. Over the next week or two, I intend on putting together a small video series that's going to lay that out for you guys. But basically, you can just run through it. Finding something to use as a transition rack is going to obviously be your biggest challenge. That the best thing I would tell you is, mentally rehearsing what you're going to do is going to be big, and then go through it a couple times. And the biggest thing in transition, whether it's T1 or T2, is going to be going fast through transition is slow. Going slow through transition is fast, because you're not going to spend 30 seconds trying to buckle your helmet chin strap because you're trying to go too fast. So I'll tell you what, Matt, let me get some videos put together, and I'll get those over to you, because I feel that's going to get you a lot better answer to that question. All right. Greg with a good question. All right, so Greg's comment, 3 weeks seems like a really large block of time for a taper that is in the context of an Ironman. And then Greg said normally it takes a week of easy distance, but keeps the intensity up for a half. Greg, it really, it's athlete dependent. There's in general, a 2-3 week taper for an Ironman is very normal. For a half, I would say anywhere from 10 to 14 days could be just fine for a half. The one thing that we didn't get into in real great detail this evening is how the performance management chart plays a role in measuring the fatigue and the fitness and the race readiness. And I think that we'll probably cover that next week, just to kind of build on top of this one. But there are ways with the power meter and the Garmin that we can very precisely measure your levels of fatigue going into the taper and measure them as we go through. So it takes a lot of the guessing out of it, which obviously is going to be a good thing if we can take the guessing out. So, all right, good. All right, let's go with maybe a couple more questions. Anything you guys have? Lisa, you're the only one who hasn't asked a question. Give me something good, Lisa. Okay, Lisa definitely delivers. All right, so what are my thoughts on compression garments? I think that there is new research coming out every day on this, or every month, I guess, at this point. It really, I've seen studies that show compression is good during a race. I've seen studies that show compression does nothing for you during a race. I kind of feel that reading through the majority of the studies, compression during an event or during training is more of a mental benefit for the person who's using it. And it doesn't matter whether it's a mental benefit or whether it's a physical benefit, it's a benefit. And I'll take as many benefits as I can get while I'm training and while I'm racing. And I think everybody else would too. I think that if somebody is dealing with a little bit of an injury or something like that, then I think compression is definitely something to look at while racing or training. So that's something to keep in mind. I think compression gets its biggest benefit or gives its biggest benefit to athletes after they're done racing or training. So getting the calf guards or the socks or the tights or whatever it is on and let that aid in the recovery process, I think that's absolutely huge. And I think that there's two really good garments that can be purchased from Walgreens or CVS or Rite Aid or whatever it is in your local area. They're the white anti-embolism either tights or stockings, right? So the stockings come up to pretty much right about your knee, and then the tights will come up to right underneath your cheeks. I think the socks last time I saw them were like $30, and the tights were like 35, something like that. So it's really inexpensive. They're not the most stylish things. You're probably not going to wear them out to dinner with a pair of shorts, but I don't know. You might. I think I've done that at one point. But definitely provides a tremendous amount of compression, um, and definitely aids with recovery. So that's my 10 cents on that right there, Lisa. Great question. All right, we got Matt. Do I recommend getting a massage before a race or during a taper? Yes, massages are definitely good. I would stay away from any massages within the last three days or so, unless you have a real major injury. Once you get into race week, I would, unless you have some sort of issue, I think I would stay away from a massage therapist that you don't know, or that, better stated, doesn't know you. If they're really digging into something that can really create some issues for you, if they dig into it too deep and really kind of loosen it up too much. So I think that going into race week, I would, definitely, unless I had an issue, I would kind of try to stay either away from a massage therapist, or I would wait to have somebody who I knew and understood what I was needing from a massage standpoint. Then I think you're safe. Or if you're just going to go with someone who's going to do a real light rub down, very, very light, I think there's no issue there. But finding a therapist that just digs into you 4 days before a big event, I think that can create bigger problems than it's solving. So great question. Greg, let's see what you got here. All right, so Greg, can I wear my compression calf sleeves while I race for the mental benefit and keep them off after, or do you lose the benefit? Or do you just have to wear them for one of those? So what I think you're asking, I'm not really sure. All right, that's what I thought you meant. Sorry, Greg. When you're done, if you're going to wear the calf sleeves, so Greg's question, let me restate this since I butchered the way he wrote it initially. If I wear compression calf sleeves for the race, do I just leave them on, or have they, am I losing the benefit? What I would say is, you're gonna have to wear them in the swim. I could only imagine how ungodly difficult those would be to get on after the swim. So you're gonna wear them in the swim, normally under the wetsuit. I would, obviously you're gonna leave them on throughout the race. I think that it really, you're ultimately going to need to get cleaned up afterwards and throw some new ones on. So I think the time between finishing the race and getting home, it really is just up to you. If it's hot out and you're soaking wet, I'd probably want to get them off. One of my favorite things was taking my shoes off. Once I was done with everything, it just feels really nice to take your shoes off. So, I don't know. That's up to you. I think that once you get cleaned up, I'd put some new compression on though. All right, Lisa. How would you change your nutrition during the taper? Outstanding question. What we need to keep in mind is all this crazy endurance training that we're doing. What is that doing to our metabolic rate? That's the first question. And ultimately what it's doing, it's really increasing it a lot, right? So you're going to get into this taper, and it'll normally for an Ironman, they're going to get into that third week. The training volume seems ridiculously small for that athlete, and they are still eating like they were, doing 20 hours a week worth of training, where they're down to, 8 hours a week, let's say. So, um, you just need to keep an eye on it. You need to be aware of, how much you're eating. I think that unless you're really throwing down the calories, I wouldn't be overly concerned about it, but it's something that you definitely want to keep an eye on, maybe even reduce a little bit. And it's just because, we're burning less calories, so we're obviously not wanting to take in as much. But that's a very individualized question. So, at least for the next coaching call we have, let's make sure we chat about that. And kind of talk more specifically about you and, what we got, for some different options. So great questions tonight, Lisa. So, hey, everybody, thank you for coming out this evening. Had a good time talking with you about the taper, and I will see you guys on the next call on August 25th. All right, guys, take it easy.